Hello all, and welcome to Alchemy Custom Weaponry's presentation on the history of the 1911 pistol. Oh boy, I can't keep that accent up the whole time, so I'm certainly not going to try to do it. But welcome. Hey y'all, it's Eli with Alchemy Custom Weaponry, and today we actually have a pretty interesting, at least in my opinion, interesting video. We're going to take a little trip down memory lane, I guess, with the 1911. And we're going to talk a little bit about the patent dates. And you might be like, why? Well, because at the time of filming, this is February 14th, 2024. Now, to most people, that's Valentine's Day. But to people who really understand what love is and understand and accept John Browning's love, they understand that February 14th, 1911 is the major patent for the 1911 pistol. But, however, it is important to note that there were other patents a part of the 1911, and that really set the stage and made a big difference in what the 1911 would be. And there's a lot of history that surrounds this pistol, especially in its early years. So when you get done watching this video, I want to make sure that you go to C and Arsenal. I will actually link all of the videos you need to, and it's a lot. Listen, you're going to need a sarsaparilla, you're going to need a good armchair, because I'm telling you right now, it ain't going to be just casual listening. But essentially, they go through all of the Colt pistols that lead to the 1911, from the Colt 1900 to the obviously model of 1911, and even talk a little bit about foreign-made 1911, such as the Königsberg 1914. Very interesting gun. Definitely check them out, but we'll talk a little bit before you go over there. Great people, though, and probably one of my favorite YouTube channels in existence, to be honest with you. Now, let's set some, parameters and some expectations. I am by no means a historian. I am simply a guy who works for a 1911 company that loves 1911. So this video probably could be a 2-hour-long episode, but we're going to kind of condense it down and just give you some highlights from John Browning's early patent history. I do want to give a quick shout out to a few people before we get really into the weeds here. The first one is actually going to be Jess at Wichita Gun Club for this notebook that I've written a lot of notes about the patent stuff, because I don't know if you've ever looked up U.S. patents, but it is a lot, and it is not always worded fantastically, especially in the year 2024, when these patents were, some of them even go back to 1897 for this specific firearm, but certainly more prior to that. So big shout out to Jess, Wichita Gun Club, Alchemy Custom Weaponry Dealer. Thank you for this notebook to allow me to be able to jot notes down and do things that I thought I was done with doing when I got out of college. The next person that I want to give a quick shout out to is Alex, who is actually an Alchemy Custom Weaponry customer, and is 45.automatic on Instagram. He was very kind. Him and I are very good buddies, and we sat together on FaceTime, and we were going through the patents and kind of pulling apart the patent where we could, where we thought it'd be interesting for a video. So huge thanks to him. And then a massive thanks to retired Colonel Edmund Libby. So he actually contacted me shortly after we did the video on should you carry your 1911 cocked and locked. And he is a fantastically researched gentleman who is very versed on the early patent dates, and his specific area of interest is in the 1911, having the hammer not be cocked and locked in carry. And of course, we at Alchemy Custom Weaponry 100% advocate for cocked and locked carry on the 1911. However, if you do go off the sacred text, the original 10 commandments of the patents, that is not the way it was intended to be carried, and we'll talk a little bit about that here soon. So huge thank you to Colonel Libby, and he's also got a PhD and a lot of other letters after his name. So he is a fantastic source and has really helped with the research of this particular video. So with all those thank yous out of the way, we're going to get right into it, and you're going to notice there are some guns on the table that aren't all Alchemies. It's no secret that I am a big fan of Colt pistols. Just from the historical aspect, it's kind of hard not to be. So we have here some of my personal Colts, and of course we have a beautiful charcoal blued Alchemy here on the end, wearing some cross-section Mammoth. On this end, however, we have my Colt 1902. Now, this is a later made Colt 1902, made in 1919. They were actually made all the way up until 1928. The reason for that, these guns are 38 ACP, and what happened in 1929 was the 38 caliber ACP was then kind of dropped, and the Super 38 came out in the actual 1911 pistol. From just a manufacturing standpoint, you can understand why Colt completely dropped these guns and the 38 ACP in favor of the Super, which of course worked in the actual 1911s that they were already building for military and civilian contracts. Fantastic pistol, and that pistol is the beginning of the 1911's journey to greatness. And then, of course, here I have a beautiful 1916 Colt government model, not a model of 1911. That's important to note because the government models are civilian guns, and I'm just a big fan of civilian-made pre-war pistols. I just really like them. But I do have a model of 1911, of course, and also 1911A1. But I'm a big fan of the civilian guns, and they are great examples of what production 1911s were at one time. And the nice thing about this particular gun is that it actually has all of the patent dates on it. So when we look back at all this stuff, we can see all the patent dates, and you can use those to look up the patent numbers, and then we can start figuring out the patents from there. So let's get right into it. Thank you so much for putting up with me running my mouth and all this sort of thing. This is going to be a lengthy episode, so just bear with me. Grab you a cheer wine, get you something to eat, tell the wife, hey, don't bother me tonight. I'm learning about 1911s. It's a pretty important topic, honestly. So here we go. Let's start off with the first patent that is John Browning. Not his first patent, but his first patent towards the semi-automatic handgun. Now, it's interesting to note that John Browning actually processed 4 automatic pistol patents technically 1896, but they were approved in 1897. And it's interesting how his brain works. He's just basically trying to patent as many things as possible. And one thing we have to remember is this is 1897. At this time, the only 2 real commercially successful semi-automatic pistols is the C93 Borchardt and then the C96 Mauser. And even the Mauser is very new at this time. And so it's really hard for us to wrap our minds around, semi-automatic pistols are, it's kind of the norm, right? But it's hard to wrap our minds around that not being the norm. We're talking a revolver-dominated society who just did not understand semi-automatic pistols. So at this time, there were just so many operating mechanisms for semi-automatics that were popping up in Europe and America. And of course, John Browning learned very early that the patent system is the way to go, and he's patented 4 designs. We won't talk about all of them, but the second one, which was approved or granted in April 20th of 1897, and please forgive me, this is a lot to remember, and I don't want to forget stuff, so I do have my notebook here, and I'm going to be looking down at it, but I don't mean to be disrespectful. I just want to try to be as informative as possible. So April 20th, 1897, this is patent 580924, okay? So this is the first real patent that I think people just simply overlook it. The 1911 patent is massive and it's important for what we know as the 1911, but without this particular patent, we wouldn't have had the 1911 because this patent talks about the lock breech for the gun, okay? How the barrel is attached to the frame. We're going to talk about that in a second. And then this patent in particular led to the 1900 Colt and the 1902. It did discuss 38 ACP, which we know that because of the Thompson-Lagarde tests in 1904, the U.S. Army would go to the 45 automatic. Again, that's another patent we'll talk about here in a second. And then this is an interesting one. It talks about the double movement of the barrel downwards and back. Now, I'll have some B-roll footage, hopefully, showing you this on the 1902. It's very interesting because the 1902 utilizes 2 barrel links at the front and the back. And rather than a dropping system like we're used to on the 1911 and most semi-automatic pistols, The gun actually kind of has this parallel tilt like this. So while the barrel does come down and back to accept the next round for feeding, it's never at any means perpendicular with the frame. It's always parallel with the frame, and it kind of goes down and back like this. Really interesting, and you actually see this design all the way up until past 1905, actually. In fact, the patent that specifically talks about the 1905 talks about beefing that system up, because honestly, it is a lot of stress on the links there. There's really nothing to help with, dampening the recoil impact on the links itself of the barrel when they're dropping down. So really cool thing. And then also, this is a really important one too. This particular patent discusses the breech block, which is essentially this whole back part of the firearm where if you're looking at your slide with the slide completely off the gun, the breech block is kind of right there where the firing pin is, where the extractor is. And so this talks about how that part of the gun will cock the hammer, will eject the round using the extractor, and then also feed the next round. So it has a lot of that early, at this time, revolutionary. But it's kind of like if you read this patent and applied it to 2024, you'd say, that's how guns work. That's how semi-automatics work. And it's because of this patent that's how most semi-automatic pistols work. Really interesting. Honestly, the April 20th, 1897 patent might be one of the most important firearm patents, period. Really, it is fantastic what it discusses. And another thing, I'll try to link the patents below. Some of them are a little harder to find, a little squirrely, but you are more than welcome. The patents are free to view for the most part, and you are more than welcome to go check those out on government websites, and I think Google Patents also is available. Keep in mind that the language used in the patents is very difficult, especially for 2024. So, and me being from Appalachia, I'm telling you, I was struggling. Okay, that was some tough reading. I barely made it past the 5th grade myself, and so now I'm going to have to read 100-year-old English, and I struggle with modern English. So, anyways, the 1897 patent. Fantastic. It's a really important patent. Moving on, we have the September 9th, 1902 patent. Also, keep in mind, all of these patents are noted on the early Colt pistols. So that's a really cool thing that they're all kind of compiled together to lead to this awesome firearm we love today. A lot of people don't think about that, but that 1911 started in 1897, and then just as Colt worked through the 1900, the 1902, the 1905, all the prototypes from 1907 to the 09 to the 10 to the 11, it was a long road for John Moses Browning, and honestly, it paid off, because let's be honest, that time resulted in a gun that is still in production and still in use today. So fantastic, just really cool. So the September 9th, 1902 patent, this is 708794. It discusses a lot of the workings of the 1900 and 1902 pistols, the 1902 at this time. They did make some improvements over the early prototype pistols and even the 1900 itself. It discusses the key at the front of the gun. So that's a really important thing about the 1902 specifically, is how it actually disassembles, where you have a key that you press in and the slide comes off the entire back of the slide, or the breech block, honestly, comes off the back of the pistol. The interesting thing about the 1902 is that the barrel is kept with the frame. So that's obviously a result of the 1897 patent. And then, of course, we talk about a really, really, really controversial subject among 1911 aficionados, is the slide stop versus the slide release. Well, I'm here to tell you it's both. Per John Browning's actual words in his patent, he talks about that the slide stop was used to lock the firearm open to show that the firearm had expended all of its rounds, but it was also designed to be used to make the firearm ready for the next string of fire. You inserted a fresh magazine and then dropped the slide from the slide lock or slide catch, or whatever you want to call it, and the slide would go forward and load the next round, and you could begin firing. For some reason, among 1911 people, that's like a thing. That's like a point of argument. Is it a slide stop or a slide release? It's both. I don't understand why this even happened. Just look back at the patent, and there you go. So there's, and again, this is a major overlook. You know, a 10,000 foot overlook at these patents. You want to go read them because there's so much really cool information that's kind of stuck in there that I don't have time to go over. So we're going to keep moving on. The December 19th, 1905 patent. This is 808003. Okay. And so essentially this talks about the 1905. Now, the 1905 was essentially a 1902 that was beefed up for the .45 automatic that the prior year the U.S. Army has decided that's the caliber we're going with. So you of course have the .45 automatic that comes out in 1905. Now we need a pistol for it. The interesting thing that, if you remember, I mentioned earlier was that the links for the barrel system for this 1902 were not insanely strong, and so the .45 automatic, especially because, you know, if you do have a ton of wear or a ton of you know, stress on that gun, the way that it's set up, the slide can come off the back and hit you in the face. Just the way that that gun's designed. So we actually took a lot of, John Browning took a lot of time to sit there, and if you notice the lugs that are on the top of your 1911, they actually use those in the bottom of the barrel and also then milled the frame to accept those lugs under recoil, so that the barrel, when it was dropping down in that parallel movement, would lock into those frame lugs because the frame was, quote, stationary, and it would absorb a lot of the recoil impact and keep those links from taking all that stress, which is super cool because if you go back to Browning's 1903 pocket hammerless, honestly my second favorite gun of all time. Well, second favorite non-machine gun. The BAR is my second favorite gun of all time. But the 1903 actually uses like these locking lugs in the frame as well. Obviously in that particular instance, it's a blowback operated gun versus a breech locked, but it's cool to see kind of things pulled from different designs. And so those lugs would lock into the top when the gun was, you know, slide forward, getting ready to fire. And then they would kind of, when they unlocked, they would then lock into the frame to absorb some of that recoil. Fantastic idea, and really cool how he implemented that. But again, this is all about the .45 automatic being introduced to this design. You will actually see this design begin to really shape within the next, you know, 5 years. From basically 1905 to 1910, the design's going to go, you know, it's going to undergo a lot of change, because if you look at the 1902, it does not really resemble, like it, if you squint your eyes, you know, look at it kind of sideways, it resembles a 1911, but it doesn't really at the same time. So in that last 5 years of development is when you see a lot of the big changes on the 1911, which were then capitalized in the February 14th, 1911 patent. So this is the big one. This is the one that everyone talks about, and it's February 14th ourselves, so we're celebrating by making this video. And this is patent number 984519. This freaking patent is 15 pages long. And honestly, if you look at where the gun came from, so think about this. This gun, and I wish I had a Colt 1905. God, I wish. That's on my list, okay? That's like the number 3 gun on my list. If you look at the 1905, it's essentially this gun in a .45. And you look at comparing the two, and that's a lot of changes. You know, we've went from two links to 1 link. You know, you've got the shorter dust cover. You know, it just, everything is different. You know, I mean, there are some things that are the same, but, you know, and in this time you have the introduction of the grip safety on the gun. If you notice, it's not there, and it's not there on the 1905 Colt. It's funny, you actually, a lot of people attribute the rake of the 1911 grip angle that you see here versus the straight angle here, as well as the grip safety to the Luger, which was one of the contenders for the U.S. Army Marshall trials that the 1911 was obviously being built around. You had the Savage in 1905, or excuse me, the Savage 45 automatic, and then a Luger in 45 automatic. And a lot of people liked that Luger. They liked the rake. It was very good for one-handed shooting. It also had a grip safety, which a lot of the U.S. Army guys really liked, and cavalry also, which we'll get into. And so that was sometimes attributed to where the 1911 kind of got the idea for a grip safety. That's not like a historical fact as much kind of like a historical myth, or kind of like a maybe this is what happened, but it does kind of play along with the history of the gun. So I'm not going to go through everything in the February 14th patent because it's huge. 15 pages. It's crazy. If you want to read it, go read it. It's awesome. But the highlights, if you will, they wanted to provide a simple, powerful, and inexpensive to manufacture handgun. That was like the number one thing they said right out the gate. One big improvement, they want to ensure the safety of the user from the gun. If you'll notice, I've said a couple of times that the slide on these early Colts would come off the back of the gun. That's how you disassembled it. Also, if things broke, like the key that was in the front of the gun here, that slide was coming off the back, and it was coming off the back in a hurry. So one of the big things that we don't really think about now is the fact that this 1911, the slide has to go forward to come off the gun, which is really cool. And you don't think about why that is, but that actually comes from the slide on the 1902, the 1900, 1902, and 1905 coming off the back and potentially being dangerous to the shooter. So that's really cool. This talks about the slide stop / catch, locking the barrel to the frame. So one of the big things was, if you look at the original 1902 with the slide stop and catch, you'll notice that it only performs that function. It's actually just on like a tract that pushes up with the magazine, okay? So as the magazine follower, comes up, it's literally just like on this little track, and it comes up and locks the slide. Now we have the use of that particular part also holding the barrel to the frame. And this is something you'll see within the 1911 patent and the 1913 patent, which no one talks about, is that a lot of what Browning is doing at this point, besides just basically reconfiguring the handgun, is he's trying to simplify the gun and make parts do more than one function. This is to aid in manufacture costs, to aid in, just overall parts that you're using on the pistol. So, I mean, this really was a well thought out thing. It's not, he's not doing all this stuff just because. It all has a purpose, and sometimes that purpose can be dual purpose or three things. I mean, it's really crazy how his brain worked. So another thing that's really interesting is there is a passage about the magazine disconnect, which the 1911 never had, but there was a part of that patent that discussed a magazine disconnect, and thank God it didn't, because if we know anything from the Browning High Power, we know magazine disconnects suck. So thank God that we did not have the magazine disconnect on the 1911. But essentially it was going to be something very similar to how the Browning High Power worked, where the magazine depressed a lever that would lock the trigger when it wasn't in there. So, with the magazine out, the trigger was locked up, and with the magazine in, it was free to move. But as we know, there is not a single gun or handgun that uses a magazine disconnect that has a nice trigger. Okay, so glad that one's off the table. The other thing was the bushing, and they went into a lot of a lot of detail about the bushing and the spring plug, which they didn't call a spring plug. Lots of old words for these parts. So they went into a lot of detail about how the bushing locks in and what its purpose is with the barrel. So, that was a big thing too. Also, of course, we went to a shorter dust cover, with that introduction of basically a one-link barrel. So, because you don't need that full-length dust cover because there's no link in the front of the gun, so you don't need to go all the way out there. Okay, the next thing was the thumb safety, which, funny enough, they actually introduced the thumb safety, and this is a whole bag of worms here. They introduced the thumb safety in 1910. In fact, I believe the prototypes for the 1910s went out, and I believe most of them were recalled to have a thumb safety fit to them. There is a 1910 at the Browning Museum in Ogden that seems to be all original to 1910. So very cool there, and it does not have the thumb safety retrofitted to it. Very cool to see that in the wild. But this does talk about the plunger tube and the safety and the way that the thumb safety interacts with not only the holding the grip safety in, but also interacts with the breech block or the slide, in that it will lock the slide so that a round cannot be chambered into the pistol with it on safe, or with it on safe using that. So, of course, we've talked about the slide stop. It does mention the hammer geometry, so the hammer geometry and the grip safety, and we'll talk a little bit about this later as well. But essentially, they wanted to be able to release the hammer with one hand. So if the hammer was cocked, they wanted to be able to depress the grip safety by pushing back on the hammer, that which depressed the grip safety, and then you're allowed to lower the hammer from there, and they wanted to be able to do it one-handed. So that was something that actually was specifically noted in that original patent. And really, let's just be honest, to cut it kind of short, it's just the 1911 as we know it today. You know, it's the 1911 as we know it today. It's a fantastic pistol, and a lot of the gun that you hold when you hold an Alchemy came from the February 14th, 1911 patent date. So that is especially important, and that's why kind of February 14th is sort of 1911 patent day, because it is the patent that made the 1911 what it is today. But it's really cool that from February 14th on, there's no major changes to the 1911. Of course, there was one more patent to talk about, and that is the August 19th, 1913 patent. Now, keep in mind, there actually are some 1911s that don't have this patent date on them because they were built prior to 1913. So that's actually a really easy way to tell. I actually had somebody who tried to tell me he had like a 1912 gun or something like that, and I was going to buy it, right? And he was like, oh, okay, cool, you know, here's pictures of it, and sure enough, it had 1913 markings, and of course, the serial number then confirmed it was, I believe, in 1916, much like this one, not as nice. And I was like, dude, how can it be, you know, 1912 if it has 1913 mark slide, and of course, the serial number? So, something to kind of think about. But the August 1913 patent is 1070582, and it is a little bit of an improvement. They're just kind of simplifying the gun as where they can. They have some notes about how how all of the trigger mechanisms work, the safety mechanisms. There is a note of the mainspring housing, and then they just kind of reiterate the 1911 patent. But one little thing that I do want to talk about in this patent in particular, and one that Colonel Libby really wanted me to express, is that this discusses the thumb safety. Okay, now we talk about the thumb safety, and as modern 1911 users, that's a big deal. You carry the gun cocked and locked. However, at the time that this patent was out, and at the time that this gun was out, you have to think, to someone who's used to using a revolver, carrying a gun cocked and locked is like carrying a revolver basically with the hammer back the whole time. It just was not something that they were used to doing. So the thumb safety was implemented for a couple of reasons. Essentially, they wanted you to carry the gun when, you know, the way they wanted you to carry the gun was with the hammer up, right? And then you cock the hammer and then you fire the gun. However, it is noted in that 1913 patent, and you have to read it because it's kind of mind-blowing, especially if you're one of those people that says, oh, John Browning designed it to be carried cocked and locked. No, the correct thing you want to say is Jeff Cooper advocated for it to be carried cocked and locked, which is correct. You should totally carry it cocked and locked. But to say John Browning designed it that way, not necessarily true. What he did design was kind of a fail-safe. So essentially, like I said, they want the gun to be able to be decocked with one hand, which is fine when you're not under fire, on a horseback, or basically in any stressful situation. So this particular thumb safety was designed with the intention of, okay, you know, I'm cavalry, because keep in mind, cavalry was a big deal back when this gun came out. Like the cavalry mafia, or the horse mafia as we call them, was the reason that the grip safety was enacted. We made a video about that. Make sure you check that out. And of course they think, well, how am I supposed to lower the hammer on a gun while I'm riding a horse and getting shot at by you know, whoever, which, you know, only a couple of years later would be, you know, the Pancho Villa and Zapata desperados, if you want to call them that. But anyways, so the thought process there was, okay, if I'm under stress and I am needing to ride and I'm not shooting, but I can't really depress the grip safety and lower the hammer, I can throw the lock on, you know, stuff it in my holster, and then get to a place where I can then administratively lower the hammer on the gun and deem it safe for carry. So the thumb safety was kind of a safety under stress situation rather than the way that the gun was designed to be carried. In fact, U.S. Army manuals from that time confirmed this, as well as even holsters. So a lot of cavalry holsters actually would not let you button the flap if the hammer was back. So very interesting thing there. So all this to say that it is incredible that we at Alchemy Custom Weaponry get to build a gun that is as historic and influential in firearms as it is. The 1911 is the gun that kind of set the stage for majority of modern firearms. Of course, you do have the P38 Walther that then kind of branched its own, you know, legacy that that's currently with the Beretta M9 or 92, whatever you want to call it. But no gun has been more influential for automatic handgun design than the 1911 pistol. And so it is really cool that we get to make it in its purest form. I mean, we really try to stay true to the original gun as much as possible with, you know, modern kind of carry considerations in mind. Of course, you're not really going to carry a gun with a ring or a delta hammer in a position where you'd have to cock that, because on top of the hammer not being made really, you know, with the intention of being cocked in mind, the grip safety will actually get in your way as well. So of course, our guns, you want to carry them cocked and locked. It will probably not be fantastic if you carry them per the original method. But you know, hey, on this February 14th, this glorious day of Browning's epic victory over every other handgun design ever produced and ever probably will be produced, I just wanted to give you a quick, well, it's not quick, this is a long video, I'm sorry. I wanted to give you a not abbreviated history of where the gun came from and the other important patents, not just the February 14th, 1911 patent. And I really hope you've enjoyed this as much as I've enjoyed talking about it, because there's nothing I love more than the 1911 and especially the history of the 1911. So thank you so much for being a part of this journey. Stan, if you're here to the end, you're just a trooper. Thank you so much. You know, you have my undying allegiance there. And make sure you check out CN Arsenal. They have, like I said, they have a comprehensive video that goes from the 1900, videos that go from the 1900 to the 1911 and even beyond. So I will make sure to link those, because you will want, if you're interested in history, you will want to see those videos, and they are fantastic. So with that, thank you so much. This is Eli with Alchemy Custom Weaponry, and remember, always carry cocked and locked.